these developments have placed a heavy burden on hard-working people around the world.
What is the market, and how do we protect this vital human institution with its rich history? In commerce, in war, in culture, in politics, the market has always been hugely important to us. What is its future in all of our lives? Sir Paul Tucker is a research fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. He says the world is facing a grave new challenge. It is technology's challenge to the liberal economy. And he suggests we need new leadership to cope with it. What does the word market mean to you?
Something where I can sell my labor for money, something where I can sell something I own for money, something where I can borrow freely, and I can choose who I'm transacting with on prices that are either negotiated bilaterally, but where competition drives prices close together.
How free are you as an individual in that set of transactions you just described?
Depends how efficient the market is. So say I'm selling markets just in a standard stall somewhere, selling apples or oranges. Well, I'm free to decide how many apples and oranges to sell, but the price is one that I'm going to take. Because if my price is too high, you will go to the next door stall. But the key thing is, I'm free to decide to be there, and I'm not stuck somewhere else with a role assigned to me in a different kind of political order.
And do you, because of that, is it too strong a word to use in your attitude to markets and the market, the word revere, which some do and some don't and some resile from? Is it a mechanism that we should look on with reverence?
No, reverence is too strong. We should revere our liberation from our role being assigned to us, so that I can choose. What I do these days is try to write books. That's a choice. People have a choice whether to buy the books or not. People have a choice whether to publish the books or not. We should be very grateful for that. Grateful is a better word than revere. But revere of the markets themselves would imply something like them always being efficient. And if you and I transact, the only people affected by a transaction are you and I. So you and I transacting in something, and it's a completely uncoerced deal. We agree the quantity price, all freely, all going well so far. But then we enter into this transaction, and actually it affects other people as well. So in fact, what we've been doing, what I've been selling you, is a pollutant, and the people filming this all suffer from the pollution. Economists call this an externality. And lots of markets have externalities.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't revere those at all.
Yeah, I mean, that encapsulates, doesn't it, the complexity of the market and of talking about the market, because of the range of things that you need to encapsulate when you define it.
So yes, I agree. So when people talk about perfect markets, they typically mean perfect and complete markets. And what complete markets means in a crude nutshell is that anybody can enter into any transaction to insure themselves against any conceivable state of the world at any time in the future. So it's completely insured. And in that world where people won great prizes for showing full efficiency then you could revere those markets. Actually, you'd still have distributional issues because who ended up with what would depend upon the initial distribution of endowments. Yeah. But we shouldn't revere markets that are imperfect. We should be grateful for them because all the alternatives are worse. But reverence implies a kind of, well, you couldn't do better than that. Mm. And actually, we know we can do better than that. And one of the ways we sometimes do better on it, the free marketers approach would be, well, actually, there's a missing market. Maybe we can create a new market for something. And another approach would be, well, we'll tax the pollution.
Yeah. You started your answer talking about labour and your free gift of your labour in return for something, which takes us neatly to feudal times, which is in a sense where the story that you're telling begins, because there wasn't that freedom then. And then that freedom was achieved. And what at that stage changed?
Well, it's an interesting thing to think about what brought it about, to start with, in our country, but elsewhere in Western Europe as well. It was partly the bubonic plague, which left a scarcity of labour. And so there was a greater demand for labour to move to places. And I put it that way because the really great thing was being able to move, choose to move somewhere, and to bid for work, as opposed to, I'm born here. My role is in this plot of land. I owe service to you, who owes service to some higher local magnate, who owes service to the king. A series of personal reciprocal obligations. A completely different world. And the end of feudalism means that suddenly I can go and sell my labor somewhere else for money. And with the money, I can buy other things. And this is the beginning of what David Hume and Adam Smith called commercial society.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely transformational.
That's the point, isn't it? It changes your life as an individual, but it changes society.
Yes. It becomes a society of exchange rather than of obligations, and a society where who I am and who I become isn't fixed from the beginning.
Yeah. Which fits like a hand in a glove, if that's the right expression, with liberalism, doesn't it? With the idea of you as an individual being individually important.
Yes, yes.
And that lasts how long, historically?
Well, until now. Mm. Until now. Interwoven, possibly, in the West with something else as well. The idea emerging in medieval times that each of us individually can have a relationship with God. So what's happening during that period is very different from, say, the Confucian tradition, which kind of persists until this day in China and other parts of the Far East, where I'm defined by my role. Mm. And for some people, it's still like that in the West. It's important not people that hold public office. Their position, I think, is partly defined by their role. They have obligations and duties and responsibilities, and also up to a point can make claims on the society that are different. But this is a tiny number of people, whereas everybody was defined by their role in the past. I think a key thing here, this becomes more important after feudalism, is who counts. Who counts in the game of government. So we have rulers, and there are never very many of them. David Hume says somewhere, well, there are always more of the ruled than there are of the rulers. So the rulers can't possibly really be ruling purely by coercion. We, the ruled, are kind of accepting it somehow. It's a matter of opinion. he says. But whose opinion? This is now me rather than Hume. Whose opinion? I would say, well, the people who can offer meaningful resistance to the rulers. And so why do they matter? So imagine you're the ruler, and in a kind of very narrow rationalist sense, you quite want to be the ruler because you get some returns from being the ruler. But there are costs as well. Obviously, costs to being a top politician now, but there have always been costs to being a ruler. You're constrained in various respects. And you want to meet the demands of some of the ruled so as to maximize your net returns from governing. So who can resist matters a lot. And as the liberal world becomes more and more liberal, I think one of the things that happens is that the population of people who can meaningfully resist broadens. Yeah. So now we think about today's world, then we work back a bit. Today's world, all sorts of people can resist. I mean, you can have trade unions organizing people to go on strike, or I can work a little bit less hard at work, kind of passive resistance. You can do passive resistance in the office. And when that happens, the bosses will make concessions. Well, if we go back to feudalism, I'm in my little field. I mean, actually, I can't offer much resistance to anybody. And what broadens the population of who can resist is probably initially technology, military technology and things like that. But later on, it's values themselves. Mm. And then eventually we end up thinking that everyone actually counts, that they're somehow politically equal and they should all have a vote. And so the way resistance really works now in our democracies is that we go and vote.
And it's part of our mindset too.
Yes.
That's the fascinating thing about what you've just explained.
So my story would be, and it's not only mine for goodness sake, is a lot of our values, norms have their origins in things that are functionally useful. Yeah. So David Hume talks about promising being something that emerges because it's useful. But of course, once that's become habitual and we internalize the value of the habit, actually, we don't break our promises because that's a bad thing to do. We don't think, well, is it useful or not to keep promises? That's been effaced, as it were. And so our liberal values are a product of our history, our contingent history. But we imbibe them and they start to matter to us deeply, intrinsically. When I vote, I cry sometimes, not every time. Seriously. Mm. I'm just amazed. Mm. I'm just amazed by this business of being able to vote out our governors. And if you think about our referendum, in a sense, this is a point made a lot, and who knows how true it is, but there's a sense that a lot of people were just voting against the system. They're just fed up. Now that, I voted Remain. I voted Remain for geopolitical reasons, but that capacity of people to register their protest against the system, I think that is a wonderful thing.
And while you cry sometimes when you vote, I think it's fair to say, isn't it, that actually many more people not only don't cry, but actually don't notice, in a sense, the great gifts just described.
That's right. Well, and in one sense, that's, people can't be thinking about things all the time, for God's sake. That's part of the point. I mean, people are meant to take it for granted. Yeah. And just because...
Well, that's part of liberalism.
It is part of liberalism. Yeah. You're meant to take it for granted so that if it is taken away or diluted in some way... And then in a sense, I do think the Brexit referendum vote, and there have been similar votes elsewhere, is partly about that. You've taken something away from us. You've taken away a degree of choice that we were meant to have, and here's what we think of you. That's overstated, but it's still it's more than a safety valve. Of course, it doesn't of itself cure any of the causes for people feeling frustrated in the first place, but it's better to know the frustration.
Take us through where we are now and the assumptions that we have made about liberalism and its place in the free market and the causation impact as well, and whether we're in a situation now where truly we are looking at a new dispensation, as it were, created by the modern world.
So if you think about the last, 200-300 years, possibly more than that, the considered view of historians, political scientists, others, the common sense view, is that liberalism and economic growth and economic progress go together, that they're mutually reinforcing. And this becomes kind of almost obvious when you turn it around. So in an autocratic society where the ruler can extract the surplus from people, there is less incentive to invest. There is weaker incentives to invest in risky, cutting-edge ventures. So autocracy, the received wisdom would have been, will reduce investment, technical progress, as economists call it. And conversely, to the extent that there is investment in cutting-edge technology, steam engine, electricity, that tends to widen the population of people with some resources that they can mobilize to resist the ruler, the government, and so the government retreats from being autocratic. That's the kind of story of democratic liberalism, if you like. First of all, in commercial society, it's the merchants. In our country, the merchants demand votes. The incipient industrialists demand that some of the northern towns should have seats in our House of Commons, and they've become prosperous enough to press their case. And later, in the factory world, there's organised labour. They have a political wing. They demand an extension of the franchise. And in the 20th century, all those people that moved from blue-collar jobs to white-collar jobs, who were, in a sense, the epicenter of democracy. So that's just a sketch, but this idea of economic progress and some deepening and broadening liberalism going together, you could make sense of it analytically, and certainly the history of our country seems to bear it out, and the history of other liberal, rich countries seems to bear it out. But maybe not. So the new technology is really interesting, and a few people have started to wonder whether for the first time in ages, not just spasmodically, but structurally, that actually autocracy and investment in cutting-edge technology may be mutually reinforcing, that the autocracy would not come under pressure from economic growth and technical progress. And before I go on to kind of give an example of that, it's worth remembering that the end of history moment, which for a long time I must say I didn't believe in, but when I was writing my book, Global Discord, I came to definitely believe there was an end of history moment. There was a sense in Washington, in European capitals, of the inevitability of countries moving in a liberal direction as they became more prosperous. And although I think that was a reckless view to take, irrespective of what I'm now going to go on to discuss, I I think for the first time in ages, it actually looks as though maybe autocracy and technical progress can go together. So think about facial recognition. So there's been some work that's been done in Harvard by a man called David Yang in the economics department that shows that when there is political unrest or unrest of various kinds around the provinces of the People's Republic of China, that not so long afterwards, there is an increase in investment in facial recognition technology in that region. And furthermore, that with a bit more of a lag, again, that actually after the extra investment in facial recognition, the incidence of unrest goes down, relative to places, of course, where the investments haven't been made in facial recognition. The thing that goes the other way is that reinforcing, kind of reciprocally reinforcing, is it seems that state investment in facial recognition, by widening the use of facial recognition, gives access to more data to the state, which enables it to police its citizenry more efficiently, which is why, by the way, in passing, we shouldn't be in love with the idea of efficiency. Bad things can be efficient. The efficiency of their surveillance and their control of their own population, and what's more, accelerates technical progress in that area.
In that area, but in other areas as
not
well,
so sure.
Not suppress it. I suppose that would be the liberal answer.
Yeah, not so sure.
Yeah.
Not so sure.
Because I suppose if there is, I mean, you've set out very clearly, and it's not just facial recognition, is it? There are other aspects of the modern world where stuff is collected that can be used against us by governments, by private companies as well. But I suppose if you're optimistic about liberalism's ability to overcome that, you would say, well, even in those circumstances, yes, you can round up people and you can do all sorts of other awful things, but you're not going to do anything for economic growth by doing that stuff.
Too early to tell. I mean, they're in the lead in other areas of the new technology. And so it's not yet obviously hurting them. I mean, I think the liberal instinct is well, they just can't sustain this. Yeah. But the liberal instinct, and that may be right, but the liberal instinct we have about that is born of our own history.
Yeah.
We look at our own history and think, well, they couldn't sustain the repression.
Yeah. Well, Clinton going to China and saying whenever it was, making a speech where he says, good luck keeping people under with the internet. And they seem to have managed quite well.
Yes. So we don't know. We don't know what history is going to bring to us. But I think this is the key point. So say you had an oversimplified view where the views we hold are a kind of lagged product of the state of technology, and the path of technology over the last 500 years has driven us in the direction of liberalism. It really matters that if the direction of technology now pushes us in the other direction, that we actually hold on to our liberal values. That actually our liberal values should start to constrain how the technology is used. And this comes back, I think, in our world, the free world, to where you started about markets. So if you think about the great American West Coast companies who scrape our data off, in a completely efficient market, we'd each auction our personal data.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas in fact...
But people have talked about that.
No, they definitely had. An economist will have this thought. And I mean, that's about as far as I've thought about it. But some people have kind of really thought about it. How would you design such auctions? And you know, a sweeping generalization about nearly everybody is, well, people don't care that much, and they've let all of this happen, which goes to show that the markets we have, and whether or not they're efficient for everybody, is not something that people get up thinking about. Yeah. They just get on with their lives, for goodness sake. And you get pockets of people only get bothered about this typically when it affects their lives in a tangible way. So somebody that's lived with the new technology throughout their teenage years, so not you or I, and suddenly they're looking for jobs and things, or they're entering politics or the theatre or whatever, and actually the whole of their life is out there on display. And then they're exposed. They're wishing that they had kept control of their data, some of them, and some not so bothered.
But is that the wake-up call?
I think the wake-up call will come through that kind of thing, through this being tangible to ordinary, regular people. And I count myself as a completely ordinary, regular person in that respect. You know, I try to be careful about cookies and things like that. I don't know how effective I am at doing it. Lots of people aren't. One of the things that we live in a period where, for the first time widely in, I would say, our biological lifetimes, you have a younger generation that ostensibly is somewhat skeptical about markets and capitalism, and yet actually has been fantastically passive about the great network companies. I mean, these companies, and I'm not criticizing these companies are trying to maximize their returns on equity to the founders and others. That is what they are trying to do. That it wasn't a kind of social cause. Yeah. It is a way of making money. But the point about liberal markets is that, subject to the externalities problem, which I want to say something else about, that can all work out well in the aggregate. But not Adam Smith, you know, the great apostle of all of this stuff, is, but be careful about monopoly. If they'll gather as much concentrated economic power as they can, and that's inefficient. People have discussed that for a long time. But the really big question, which I think was understood more in America in the early part of the 20th century and in Germany after the Second World War, is, well, what when concentrated economic power translates into concentrated political power? Because liberalism is meant to be, you know, it's many things, but it's meant to be against concentrated power. The famous checks and balances are about no part of government having too much power. But it's not just a point about public power, government power. Liberalism is also about avoiding concentrated private power. I mean, the people that claim to be liberals and say, oh, concentrated economic and private power is fine, but, you know, terrible government power, they're not. Adam Smith wouldn't have recognized them as kindred spirits.
That is an ideal place to close. Paul Tucker, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.